probably the most haunted house I ever lived in was the house I ended up referring to as Mary's house. We lived in this house for almost 3 years to the day. We moved out, it was like 2 years and 11 months. So it was almost 3 years. You know. Now, I lived in one so-called haunted house not even 3 months. And the one before it, we lived in what? September through to December. Yeah. Actually, about the end of September, it was closer to October. So it was about, yeah, October, November, December, January, 3 months. The haunted house that before it, which you've already heard about. That's Barbara's house on Peachtree. So this is the house on Moravia. And for nearly 3 years, waking up inside something that was wrong, normalizing things that should not have been normal, of telling myself over and over that there was a rational explanation for what was happening, right up until the moment I looked in a mirror and saw someone else's face where mine should have been. You know, by the time we moved out, I was just exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. And I was relieved in a way that was so physical. You know, like putting down extremely heavy weights I hadn't realized I was carrying until they were finally gone. We didn't even know her name until we were almost out the door. A neighbor told us, because he wanted to know why we were moving, I guess. I'm not sure how that conversation came about, but we were telling him about how eerie it was and all the weird things that were happening. And he said, that must be Mary, because she lived in there. And we asked, had she, died in there? And he said, no, she died in an old folks' home. But she had lived in there for a long time. I don't know anything else about her. I don't know how she lived. I don't know how she died. I guess of old age or something. And I don't know what she left behind in those tar paper walls, because it was not a well-made house. But I have thought about her so many times since. And I've wondered if she was, still there. I wondered if something else was there alongside her too. Like maybe a demon. I don't have the answers. I just know what happened, and what happened was enough. So this was just another old house, like the one on Peachtree. Over 100 years old, just like that one. I seem to have a pattern with old houses, huh? I don't know what that says about me or about the houses. It was in pitiful condition. It wasn't a beautiful place, but it was livable. It was, decent size. But the rent was great. It was very manageable. On paper, it was what my fiance and I needed at the time. The first thing I noticed was the cold. The heat would be running and the house would still be cold in some areas. Not drafty cold, not I need a heavier blanket cold. Just persistently, unreasonably cold. It was like the kind of cold that sits in the middle of a room and doesn't move no matter what you do about it. I kept turning up the heat. It was gas heat. And the gas furnace had been put in, I think, in the 40s or 50s. Yeah, that's how old the house was. It was built in 1915 or something like that. And when we lived there, when we moved in, it was 2015. So I was 100 years old. It didn't make a meaningful difference. After a while, I just stopped fighting it. I would just sit around with wearing sweaters because the cold was just going to be there. That's all it was. I remember I'll lay in my pajamas over the heater in the bedroom. That's where the furnace was. And so that room stayed. It would get hot while the heat was running. But as soon as the heat turned off, it went off. It was cold. It would get cold. The living room stayed cold. The kitchen was always cold. And the back bedroom was cold, even though it was right next to the main bedroom where the heater was, the furnace. And you can forget the bathroom. It never got back there. We had to use a little space heater to in order to be able to use the tub and the toilet. Yeah. Well, I know now that persistent, unexplained cold is one of the most commonly reported environmental signs in paranormal experiences like mine. I mean, I kind of knew it then, but I ignored it. I did. Because I'd always been into that kind of stuff, that weird stuff, since that House on Patterson. And I really got into it when they started bringing all those crazy, unreal, paranormal shows out, during the 2000s, like Ghost Hunters and Paranormal State and Paranormal this, Paranormal that, and what is that other, Ghost Adventures. I really don't like them. And Dead Files, which I was kind of obsessed with, and then Ghost Brothers. But the only people who moved into this little house, my fiance, me, and our animals, my 2 cats and his dog. And then he eventually got a female dog, but we had been there about a year when he did that, because the male dog kept just bothering us so much. We was like, he needs a companion, because the cats had a companion. So that was it. And I need to tell you about what that house did to us as a couple, and the animals. I think it's one of the most important parts of the story. Also the part that's easiest to explain away. You can always say a couple fought because of stress, because of money, because of the ordinary friction of 2 people living in close quarters. And I'm not saying those things weren't factors, but we fought in that house in a way we just hadn't before, these haunted houses. I mean, he's always had a temper, and I have a temper myself, and we both suffer from mental illness, untreated mental illness. I mean, I've always been suffering from depression and anxiety, especially depression. But the anxiety started ramping up in the 2000s, and we just kept fighting. But we really fought in this pipe. I mean, it was like all the time, at least once a week, sometimes more. And we could not hold jobs, neither of us, not for long. Things kept falling apart. Opportunities kept evaporating. There was just a grinding quality to daily life in that house that wore us both down in ways we couldn't fully account for. And when we got out of there, we still fought, but we didn't fight like we did then. I have thought about this a lot. Whatever was in that house fed on conflict in a way that, that house on Patterson did. Whether it created the conditions for discord and then sustained itself on what followed, I don't know. I just don't know how this crap works. I don't know what we experienced. We were not ourselves in that house. We just weren't. Now, when I moved in, I remember I had this very Olympus digital voice recorder I'm holding now. And I went through that house talking about how I was now living in another 100-year-old house, and just walking through the rooms and narrating it, the way people do when they're documenting a new place. And I don't remember exactly what I was saying, just something ordinary. And on the recording, underneath my voice, there is a sigh. Not my sigh, not my fiance's. He wasn't there. He was working. A sigh that it sounded, and I want to be precise about this, it sounded like someone who was just tired of listening to someone. It was an impatient sigh. Resigned. Like whoever made that sigh had heard enough and wanted me to shut up. And I heard it when I played the video back. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself it was interference, ambient sound, something the microphone picked up from outside, and I just filed it away. And that audio file is on one of my external hard drives, and I can't even access either. They both just stopped working in that house. I got all these files I can't even get onto, and it ticks me off. I'm mad about it. I'm really ticked off about that. I don't know if I uploaded that audio file to Google Drive or not. I've tried looking for it, I can't find it. Anyway, that was like within the first, I think, 2 weeks of moving in. And around the same time, I started hearing a cat meow. It would sound the same, the exact, every time I heard it, the exact same way. I would be sitting on the couch and it would go meow. I would look around, and I wouldn't see my cats. And I remember I went looking for them. I know it wasn't them. They just never made noises like that all the time. And they were back there in their, back bedroom where they always hung out, just sitting in the window. They just looked at me. And I spoke to them, and they didn't even make a sound. They just looked at me, and I went and petted them, and that was it. And I was like, what is that sound? But it was just strange. I would always hear it. I remember asking my fiance, did he hear it? And he said, no, I don't hear anything. Maybe it was one of the cats. No, it was not. It sounded the exact same every time. That same little meow. And it just didn't sound like them. It was weird. And then the small things started piling up. We had a satellite, satellite TV and everything, and it just started cutting out for no reason. I had to have the people come out there to look at it and say, there's nothing wrong with your satellite. Fortunately, they didn't charge me, but I didn't call them again when it happened. Then the coffee pot malfunctioned. One day it wouldn't work. We couldn't get it to even come on. And then the next day it would work. And things would move. You would lose things. I remember I had a $100 bill. I held it. I took it to work. It was something my fiance, my boyfriend, we became engaged in that house. And I remember he gave me a $100 bill. I took it to work. I was planning to buy something, but I didn't. And I remember taking it out of my pocket in the house, and I put it somewhere. I said, so he won't take it back, because he was really getting onto some pain pills and stuff at that time. And he didn't find it because I hid it. And I knew where I hid it, but when I went to get it the next day, it was gone. And I was like, he must have found it. And I was angry. But I didn't see him getting high on any pain pills or anything. So obviously the demon or whatever in that house took it. We would hear movement in the kitchen at night, like something shifting around. And the dog would bark, and there was nothing in there. And the dog acted like he was scared to go in there. And the cats wouldn't go in there. So it was weird. My fiance and I would look at each other, and we wouldn't say anything, because by that point we had both stopped wanting to say anything about that house out loud. And then there were the 3 knocks at the door. 3 knocks. Someone would just... And my fiance would open the door, and there would be no one there. And this didn't happen just once or twice. It happened repeatedly. Enough times that it stopped being startling, and it just became its own kind of dread. Like the dread of the expected wrong thing. Like you hear 3 knocks, so you already know what you're going to find when you open the door. Nothing. Nothing gets its own kind of answer. And I remember it was knocking. I would tell my fiance, it's probably Keith from next door. And he said, no, it's not. It's not going to be anything there. You know it. It's the demon. It's the devil. Yeah, that's what he actually said. And then I remember one time he had gone to work. This was in the first year after we moved in there. And probably during the first couple of months. And someone said, hey, and it was his voice. And I was like, I rolled over in the bed and said, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at work. And there was no one there. I jumped up and I went to look out the window. His van wasn't out there. It was just my car. And I don't know. I just was freaked out. I jumped back in the bed. I was actually scared to get back up, but I had no choice. And another time, he said my name. Yeah, it was my fiance's. And he always calls me by my first name. He never calls me by the shortened version of my middle name. And I didn't even answer, because by that time I knew I was awake, and I hadn't heard him hit a different van by that time, and it made a slight noise, and, a distinctive noise, so you would know when it was pulling up. And plus a dog would get excited. By the time he had the female dog, so they both would be acting crazy, and neither one of them got up, like they knew something was wrong, and the cats were scared to come out of the back bedroom. So it was just a weird house. And then votive candles started being thrown at him. Other things, cans of air freshener, just small objects lifted and thrown by nothing visible. He was poked. He was lying in the bed and something poked him. He thought it was me, and I wasn't even in the room. I was in the bathroom. And another time, he opened the door to come in, and I was sitting at the computer, and the door just slammed shut. And all I saw was his startled face before it slammed shut, and he said something grabbed the knob, the other side of the knob, and just prevented him from coming inside the house. And I remember reaching out to this psychic, and I told her everything that was going on, and she told me a feminine spirit was in that house protecting me from him. Because we had those arguments. I didn't even tell her about that, about the arguments. And she said, give her some white flowers. I forgot what kind, maybe gardenias or something, and she'll stop. And and I was like, please. I just prayed. I prayed to the goddess, because at that time I was not into Christianity at all. I wasn't really into religion, period, basically. I was like had backed away from Wicca, which I had been into, but it was just weird. The whole house was weird. And when I saw that with the door, I saw that with my own eyes, it freaked me out. It just freaked me out. But by that time we weren't, it was just, I don't know. It just couldn't be anything else but the devil, the demon in that house. It just frightened me more than anything else that happened in any other houses. This thing was patient. It had listened long enough to know his voice, and it used what it knew. Now I have to tell you about the animals, because this is like the third house that I've talked about where animals have been affected. I don't think that's a coincidence, and I think whatever inhabits these spaces reaches for the most vulnerable things first. And animals can't rationalize what they're sensing. They can't tell themselves it's nothing. They just feel it. My male cat, Tigger, he kept running away more than once. He just would leave. He would get out through the screen and just take off. I remember one time he took off for I don't know, he was gone for 2 weeks, and somehow we found him. The dog found him. And he had been starving wherever he lived, but been hiding, and it was terrible. Cats are territorial animals. They don't just leave a place repeatedly without a reason. But Tigger had a reason. And then my female cat, Tigress, got so sick. She was well, and then she wasn't. She started losing weight. And my fiance had to put her down because I couldn't afford to take her to a vet and do it. I called the vet, and they told me her liver's shutting down. Her kidneys are shutting down or something like that. And they told me they would put her down for me for like $80. And just didn't know I have the money. And it hurt. She was 10 years old. It just turned 10. And she got sick in the house, and I lost her there. I can't really say that the house caused it. I don't know if I can make that claim. But I know that she was another animal lost to another haunted house. And the pattern has not escaped me. And my fiance's female dog, she had puppies while we were living there. One of them was born blue and blue-gray and just deformed looking. And fortunately, it was dead. I took the body and just threw it out in the bushes. I didn't tell my fiance about it, because he would have blamed me. He would have. He's a dog nutter. He would definitely have blamed me for that. Because that's just how he is. I'm not a person who just looks for the bad in everything and the evil. I don't look for dark meaning in ordinary loss, but I am also not a person who ignores patterns. And the pattern of that house, the cold, the conflict, the financial rot, the animal losses, the physical attacks on my fiance, the voice imitating him when he was gone. When you take all that together, that is not a collection of unrelated coincidences. That is a house that was doing something to us, slowly, persistently, for nearly 3 years. Now, I want to tell you about the mirror. I was doing this spell, and you were supposed to use a mirror in a dark room with a candle, and you would see lottery numbers, winning lottery numbers in the mirror. And so I was sitting there concentrating on this, visualizing these winning numbers, when this male's face just superimposed itself over mine. Yeah. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I want to be accurate. It was not a shadow beside me. It was not a shape in the background. It was a face, a white man's face, laid over my reflection, where my face was, looking back at me from the mirror. And I do not know whose face it was. It was not Mary's husband, because she's black. She was a black woman. And I doubt that she was married to a white man during the time that she grew up in. I don't know if it was just a human remnant or just a demon making itself look like a human, because that's the shape that registers. I don't know. I just looked and I saw it, and then I got freaked out. I remember blowing the candle out, and I don't know if I just left the room or crawled under the covers. But I didn't tell my fiance about it. I told my brother. He was the only person I forgot about it. The only person I told about it until now. But I have never forgotten it. You do not forget a face that is not yours looking back at you from your own reflection. And that was near the end of our time in that house. I think on some level I understood after the mirror face that we just were not going to be able to stay there, despite the cheap rent. Whatever was there had been showing us things for nearly 3 years, and it finally decided to show itself directly, and I was just done. So I actively started looking for other places, and we moved out. And that's when we learned about Mary. And I've thought about Mary ever since then. About her life was like in that old house. About whether what we experienced was her or just, her restless spirit, difficult and unwilling to share her space, or whether it was something else entirely that had been there long before her and simply used her name as the closest available human anchor. I don't know. I'm not sure it changes anything. We were there. It was there. For nearly 3 years, we lived alongside something that made us fight, made us cold, took our animals through things that my fiance learned his voice, and finally put a stranger's face in my mirror. The relief we felt when we left, it was just unmistakable. Not just mine, my fiance's too. He was glad to get out of there. I mean, we never really stopped fighting. We don't fight as much now. We try not to. I'm trying to live a life that Christ wants me to live. But when we were there, we were just like hell raisers. We went at each other, and we went at each other so much that we both ended up getting a domestic charge and had to go to court about it. Had to get lawyers. I had to use this lawyer that I had worked for, and he used a lawyer that his employer's was his employer's father-in-law, and the charges were dropped, but we still kept fighting a bit. But we never fought like we had in that house. We went at each other physically. We would throw things at each other. He would threaten me. He even put his hands around my throat and tried to strangle me. And I almost stabbed him with a pair of scissors. We never have fought like that since. It's just crazy. We've threatened each other. People just do that. Not like that. Not like that, ever. I've asked myself many times whether I'm just drawn to these type of places. Whether there is something about me, my sensitivity, my history, my particular way of moving through this world that makes me visible to things that other people don't notice. And, I don't have an answer to that. What I have is the record, what I experienced, as clearly as I can put it, with nothing added, nothing taken away. Mary's house is the last of these so far, but it's not the last place that I have to tell you about. I have to tell you about another place, and it never happened with me. It happened with my brother, and I'll talk about that one, and I'll tell you about some other things that happened, with him and with family members. They're just little experiences people had, not just in a particular place, but just experiences. So anyway, I'm gonna let you go for now, and I hope you don't experience what I had to, because really I just never want to go through that again.